Tony and Carmela sit in the doctor's office after previous episodes talk about her potentially having a fever and Tony's excuse of menopause. Tony saying menopause is him trying to brush aside Carmela's actual problems with something he can't directly help with, setting it aside and letting nature take its course. Carmela having a low response fever is an outward manifestation of her inner conflict related to her relationship with Furio and womanhood. Because Furio, someone she connected with and quote-unquote loved, disappeared, it told her in bold letters that Tony will always have a humongous grip over her life. Her happiness can be essentially taken away if Tony chooses to do so. This object of vulnerability veers his head when she gets into a slight argument with Meadow and her friends. This argument is about a book they have read named Billy Budd. Billy Budd is a novel with the literal meaning of good and evil, something allegorical of something entirely black and white. It's argued for having a lot more nuance than one can actually recognize, however. Ironically, this is Carmela's dynamic and terrible conflict for last episode's Eloise and this episode as well. Love Tony, he provides for you, is a lot less black and white and a lot more nuanced when you reveal the different shades of the characters. Similar to Billy Budd, the titular main character, subsexual ideas on romance and eroticism come to light when looking at Carmela's character. This is half of the reason why she rejects the notion of any homosexual themes inside the book, because she does not want to acknowledge any secret romance, let alone her own. The second half is because she does not want to concede to Meadow in any way possible. Ever since the first episode of The Sopranos, Meadow and Carmela have butt heads. Now, as two adults with two real opinions, it is entirely difficult to wave the mom card and win the argument. Meadow is now a real adult and a real woman. She's working hard to earn a place in the world and using her intellect, upbringing, and womanhood to build her this future. This makes Carmela insecure, of course, at the prospect of another woman working for her place in the world, as she was simply handed everything. At the end of the previous episode, when Tony asked Carmela, wasn't it her dream to have Meadow be the smart, independent woman? She blankly stares and even more blankly answers, yes. She closes her eyes as we fade to black and the song Little Bird by Annie Lennox plays. The literal meaning of the song, evidenced by a single listen or Google search, is recovery and self-improvement. Obvious foreshadowing of the following episode whilst almost recapping Eloise. While in the doctor's office, Patsy calls Tony and tells him that Chris is out of rehab. Tony tells Patsy to go talk to him, but Patsy doesn't. Tony is trying to have Patsy give a feel for if Chris is really rehabilitated, but Patsy doesn't go talk to him. Likely because Patsy is jealous of Chris for being an active capo, having a woman like Adriana, insulting him as well, then getting away with so much because of her relationship with Tony. As Tony said, if they weren't related, he would have been dealt with. The doctor confirms Carmela doesn't have lupus, an interesting metaphor as Carmela still has her own inner conflict. Tony and Carmela plan to stop as we cut to Johnny and Jenny Sack. Jenny tells John that they're behind on their daughter's student payment loans. She also tells John that she's going shopping, and she also tells him that she's excited for their trip to Italy. All things that are tightening John's bank account. With the Esplanade closing down because of Carmine and Tony's tit-for-tat war, John becomes momentarily enraged and yells at his wife. In contrast, Tony shows Carmela a house they plan on buying together, a summer house for the family to connect them together, a house called Whitecaps. They sit on the porch reminiscing on the time they wish they could have something like this. We take a look at the current junior soprano Rico case. Last episode, we had Eugene Pontecorvo be a very bad boy and threaten a member of the jury into essentially throwing the case. We also see Larry Barisi here, which is funny because I named the script Albert Barisi. I named it that because we rarely see this crew or any of the family.
I think you created a fucking Frankenstein in Junior.
I created. We'll all agree to let Junior have his day. Let him be the lightning rod, and when lightning strikes, God forbid, and somebody goes down, it's not a young man with a family. You remember this? We all agreed.
Yeah, we agree, but who the fuck expected to get raped over here?
Tony orders takeout, and we come to find out they're missing some essentials. Carmela reorganizes the silverware that Tony put out. Immediately after, AJ says the F word, and Carmela says he has to put $3 in the jar. She even says Tony has to as well, even though she only said it when AJ brought it up. These are the several ways that Carmela is reaching for control over her life. It's subtle, but important. Last episode proved to her that nothing she has is really hers, and this is her best attempt at seizing the smallest bit of control. An important nuance here is that she understands she can't control Tony. When he yelled out the swear words, she didn't even bat an eye. Only when AJ says it, someone she has quote-unquote strength over, she does make an effort. Fast forward, the next morning, Chris comes to pick up Tony, and Tony says,
"Hey, Jack Lemmon,
This is a nod to the fact that Jack Lemmon practically drank himself into the grave, and Tony is using this to prod at the fact that Chris was on a similar bender before rehab. Tony meets up with Johnny Sack, and this idiot doesn't step out of the way when they're walking. Tony asks John what's in it for him. He quotes the Beatles' Hey Jude and says he'll take a sad song and make it better.
I'd take a sad song and make it better.
This is in reference to how low Jersey and the Soprano crime family are on the pecking order. Cited multiple times in future conflicts, the Soprano crime family are generally weak in terms of numbers and influence. He then goes to reassure Tony that this won't be like Castellanello, which is an obvious reference to the hit against New York Gambino crime family boss Paul Castellanello by John Gotti to subsequently become boss. John, nee Sack, is saying this to egg on the fact that Tony is a requirement in order to maintain general rule in this thing of ours. As they talk about more details, Tony plays on Johnny's insecurity and money problems. He pretends to back out but ups the ante on their agreement, basically scamming the fuck out of John. Tony tells Chris about their move against Carmine, and he substantiates a lot of Johnny's concerns with the fact that Johnny doesn't have a lot of income outside of construction and how Carmine never made it right with Johnny about the weight comments with Ralph. We then get two great shots with Chris and Tony, one I used for my original note taking, but a good metaphor for the entire relationship, albeit accidentally. Chris's loose nature pushes him away from Tony and what's actually important in their life, i.e. Whitecaps. The seller, Al, comes up to Tony and they talk about buying the property in about 2 weeks. Al cancels on his current buyers, but while he's talking, he is very disingenuous, saying ifs and whatnots. One comment interests Tony as Al says if the buyer calls their agent, the agent will call their bank and they'll supposedly get their deposit back. Tony calls the family, plus Finn, to look at the new family house he just brought. AJ is naturally dressed like a dork, while Tony and Carmela step into the ocean. Chris meets with some black guys to carry out the hit on Carmine. When Chris gives them their down payment, the main guy responds, "Next sound you hear." Very funny considering their fate later this episode and Bobby's infamous line in Sopranos home movies.
You probably don't even hear it when it happens, right?
AJ comes home from school and picks up a call from Irina. This line always interests me, but I could not find anything of its origin, or where it's from, or what it means symbolically. I think the writers for this episode just gave AJ something quirky to say. At most, I found this Twitter guy, but that's hardly a plus because he seems like a One Piece fan. Irina confirms if it's Carmela on the phone, and then
Hello?
Irina calls again and informs Carmela that Tony has slept with Svetlana. This entire phone call, Irina constantly belittles Carmela, saying that without Tony's kids, she'll be disposable, saying that Irina is a piece of shit, but Carmela is lower on the totem pole, even equating their situations to be the same thing because Tony is with their cousin instead of either of them. Carmela looks distressed. Immediately, Tony is driving home and sees his stuff thrown out the house. He drives over his golf clubs when this song plays. This song is Lila by Derek and the Dominoes. This song is about unrequited love and the feeling of being left out while someone you love is having their own relationships and feelings. Pretty obvious choice here by the production team. Tony comes inside the house to confront Carmela. Carmela locks the door and Tony asks what did he do this time. He asks if it's about his comment about her father's psoriasis. I find it interesting that Carmela opens the door when Tony starts speaking about family, almost confronting him with the idea that he isn't allowed to speak on that anymore. Carmela says that Tony has made a fool out of her for years with the whores he keeps getting around with, citing that Irina called and AJ answered. Tony snaps back saying that he hasn't seen her in forever and that she is insane. Carmela responds saying that Tony hasn't been sleeping with her but her cousin. She goes on a long diatribe but Tony denies it all. Carmela says that Tony has been using up all his time and energy with these women, an incident with the preschool teacher and bodybuilder before. Tony immediately responds yelling at her for stealing $40,000 from Tony's bird feeder. She of course denies his accusation. They have both lied to each other now, both concerning their primary interest in the relationship. Tony's being a woman's sexuality and Carmela's being a monetary gain. Carmela naturally believes Tony is lying because of the fingernail she saw and placed on Tony's nightstand. The incredible and almost disturbing detail / nuance here is that the fingernail in question belongs to Valentina, another mistress Carmela knows nothing about. She was one of Tony's Gumars who he kept around to spite Ralph. Tony did think she was pretty and etc., but another motivator was to take something away that Ralph has. Ralph also thinks so, at the very least. Tony looks to answer that it was another woman's, but he knows how terrible that will sound, so he just lets it go. A Chekhov's gun that is paid off amazingly. They both run out of things to say, and Tony just asks what. Carmela asks what does Svetlana have that she doesn't. Tony stands firm on his lie, citing that he will take a polygraph to prove that he did not do it. Carmela just asks Tony to leave the house once more. Tony drives to Irina's house to confront her. Svetlana answers the door, explaining Irina's motivations for calling. Tony ruined her relationship with Zellman when he beat him in front of her, and she wanted revenge for that. Tony drives the Whitecaps to sleep. A sad beat in the story that the house he bought for the family is only being used by him when they are separated. Adriana walks in a parking lot to meet with her FBI agent. She says Christopher has been better. Then they begin to talk about Ralph Cifaretto and his second in command, Vito Spadafora. The way Adriana tells it, which is obviously the truth, Vito was calling her every 5 seconds to see if she needed anything. This is just a weird retcon from the writers, or not a retcon, just weird. And this is because when we first meet Richie Aprile, Adriana, his niece, drops him off at Beansy's place. Later on that season, Silvio tells Richie to call up his nephew to make Beansy's place a little more wheelchair accessible. That means Vito and Adriana are related. They wouldn't be second cousins either. They should just be cousins. This is funny as fuck because Vito Spadafora is kind of like Luca Brasi, both being really hard-working, dependable fat guys. Kevin Gates has a song or two literally named after Luca Brasi. So basically, Kevin Gates has a song named Luca Brasi, Vito looks like Luca, and both Vito and Kevin Gates want to sleep with their cousin.
So you ready for the smoke?
I don't want no smoke, but I ain't turning none down.
Did you really your cousin?
She pulled me to the side and said, baby, that's your cousin. I ain't about to stop.
Avenably, can about McDonald's with that. Tony gets woken up by the seller of the house and tells him that Carmela and him will be separated. Later, Tony goes into the seller's house and tells him that he won't be able to buy the house. When Tony leaves, Al's wife pressures him to sell because Tony's a mobster. Al responds that he dealt with gangsters on the Neapolitan copyright thing for Enya. As far as I know, this refers to the song Ready or Not by the Fugees and how it sampled Enya's song Bodega. Naturally, Enya was pursuing legal conflict until the Fugees made a public apology and a financial settlement for their said copyright. Al is just saying here that even gangsters aren't above the law with contracts and etc. We even see this in one of the worst episodes in the series. A hit is a hit. His wife says Al doesn't have any partners, to which he says, "Thank you, Rabbi." This is just him mocking her demeanor. Obviously, he doesn't have any partners. It's just a negotiation tactic so he can keep bringing money to their family, which he is ignorant to. Outside, Johnny Sack calls Tony saying that Carmine is ready to settle. They arrive in a park, a public space so they can keep things moderately civil. Chris joins Tony. This was one of Tony's first steps into making Chris boss of the family and Face to act as a lightning rod for him. Chris, albeit high, was excited at this proposition 7 episodes ago. Carmine and Tony agree to 15% of the Esplanade project. While negotiating, Tony constantly looks at Johnny's expressions. If Tony and Carmine agree to a settlement, this means it will once again bring into contention the hit they are carrying out. Carmine says his son helped him think over their conflict and wants for Tony to always think about that even after he's gone. The way the scene is shot, it makes me think that Carmine, or little Carmine, knew there might be a move against him, so he tried to settle just to get some heat off him. The way the "I'm not going nowhere" line is delivered makes me think there's something Carmine is aware of that we're not.
Healthy as a fucking rhino, this guy.
Next, we see Meadow and Carmela talk in the morning, and Meadow prompts that their family was all predicated on bullshit as a way to cope with their separated situation. Meadow then asks if this happened because of Carmela's relationship with Furio. Carmela then says that she has never been unfaithful to Tony. Season 2, episode 10 disagrees. Again, Carmela is a hypocrite and a liar. She has almost no leverage on Tony at all, which we'll see later in this episode. Meadow cries while asking Carmela how could she allow Tony to behave that way for so many years. We will get into that soon. In short, she allowed it. We even see her acceptance and admonishment of this in season 1, episode 5, College. Tony goes out to eat at Vesuvio's and he sees Artie. Because of their weak friendship at the moment, Tony can only criticize Artie's cooking, citing his meal as not al dente, meaning not ideal tenderness. Johnny calls Tony again to figure out their current arrangements. Johnny says that things have a momentum, implying they could wait it out and buy some time. Tony confronts him on this, quoting a line from Carmela early this episode.
More is lost by indecision than by wrong decision, that's all I'm saying.
More is lost by indecision than a wrong decision.
Johnny agrees and they continue with the hit. At the Bing, the guys are talking about Johnny's sack, more specifically Paulie. He says he worked very hard to make sure Johnny liked him and that Ralphie and him were likely in cahoots in some way. Paulie says it went bad with the joke shit. Naturally, this is just more mob disingenuous coping, the same way Vito argues later that Adriana was on his tip. Paulie is twisting the story in order to make himself seem like he's not a victim. As he's trying to eat, Tony gets a call from Al. Al basically says that he will let Tony out of the contract, but he will not be getting his deposit back. Al says any intimidation will not work because he knows how mobsters get down and he has planned for this. Carmela is doing the dishes and Tony walks up in the bitch like Batman. Tony tries to open the fridge and Carmela shuts it, telling him to leave. Tony does the fakest apology ever, then tries to open the fridge again. Carmela shuts it, telling him to get out. Tony says, "Make me." Carmela then says she'll get a restraining order under a lawyer. Tony taunts her, then they get physical while yelling at each other. Carmela storms off while Tony looks enraged, upset, and ready to explode. As this happens, Tony grabs some cold cuts. We explored in a previous episode, as well as in a future one, that this is a motif that reflects the life Tony believes was chosen for him. This life again is what tears apart his relationship with Carmela. AJ and Tony moved the theater seats out on the lawn so Tony could sleep in their home theater. Some folks don't even have their own room, but yet these guys have a home theater. Tony calls Chris to call off the hit off Carmine. Holy alliteration. I just read that first take. Chris meets with his guys and two criminal masterminds do them in. Tony's relaxing in the pool when Carmela asks him to move the seats into the garage. She says they're on the lawn and they're gonna ruin the grass. Tony mocks her while referencing the movie Chinatown.
Bad for the glass, bad for the glass.
Bad for glass.
I haven't watched this movie, but it's funny that Tony references it considering the film follows an adulterer. Tony agrees to move them. Carmela asks why does she have to make this one little thing so difficult. Tony says she's getting what she came here for, because she had no other reason to be outside other than to annoy him. She denies that, saying that she wanted to water outside. Tony calls her out on this and Carmela replies, "Fuck you." Tony claps back with a "that's gonna cost you $3," an obvious reference to the jar and rule she made.
You're fined $3 for the F word.
Carmela wants to tell Tony that the reason they aren't together is because Tony has not been the least bit loving. Here is where the episode peaks. We the audience follow Tony and get a first-rate look at Tony's terrible double life. So we the audience are inclined to agree with Carmela here. However, Carmela doesn't know / acknowledge half the shit that Tony does. Not only has Carmela literally cheated on Tony before and was gonna do it many times after, she only views things in binary. It's either good or bad for Tony with no gray. Despite this binary thinking, she doesn't acknowledge his good. For God's sakes, Tony just bought a $100,000 house for the family. We are literally shown this episode that his actions are loving, maybe not all the time, but at least where it counts, with his family. Carmela here is just blowing off steam because she is sick of Tony in her life and of her life. Some people might counter argue for what I just said with what Carmela says 5 seconds later.
Whose idea was Whitecaps?
Just a bigger version of an emerald ring, so you can keep on with your other life.
The problem here is that Whitecaps wasn't just for her, it was for the family. Tony loves his family. As well, Carmela says Whitecaps is a mirage so he can continue with his double life. However, she literally just admitted that she would allow that double life to continue if she felt loved, i.e. accepted Whitecaps. Carmela just contradicted herself without her knowing it, which is why the audience are supposed to put this together and go, oh, Carmela's motivations lie somewhere else, in which we'll get into. Tony replies that she doesn't know him at all. While Carmela did fundamentally misunderstand the reason why Tony bought the house, she does understand him the best. Carmela says Tony hates her. Obviously this isn't true. Carmela's only saying this because she doesn't feel loved by Tony. We'll get into all of this soon, but please wait. Tony laughs at the idea that he hates Carmela. He then tells her not to worry, as he's going to hell when he dies, quoting Carmela's line from the pilot.
Oh, don't worry. I'm going to hell when I die.
Oh, we all got different needs.
What's different between you and me is you're going to hell when you die.
This was a bite back at the claim that he is the one that hates her. Inside the theater room, Carmela apologizes for saying what she said in the pilot. She reminisces on how Tony made her feel during those first years. Tony vehemently asked Carmela who did she think he was when they got married. Tony goes on a diatribe about who Carmela is and the life she has lived.
Carmela, who the fuck did you think I was when you married me, huh? You knew my father. You grew up around Dickie Moltisanti and your Uncle Eddie. Where do you get off acting all surprised and miffed when there were women on the side? You knew the deal. And your mother can talk all she wants about what's his name and his fucking chain of drugstores. You and I both know that the other boyfriend you were debating marrying was Jerry Toofy with his father's snowplow business. And we now know that that wouldn't have suited you at all.
Well, you don't hear me, do you? You think for me, it's all about things.
No, I forced all this shit on you. What you really crave is a little Hyundai and a simple gold heart on a chain.
At the end, Carmela calls Tony hateful. Mind you, most of what Tony says is correct. Dickie Moltisanti was made before the electric light. Carmela knew what she was getting into the minute she married Anthony Soprano, son of Johnny Soprano and nephew of Junior Soprano. Tony's revealing that the infidelity and etc. was part of his life as a mobster. Carmela complaining about it now is trying to have her cake and eat it too. I'm not condoning Tony's actions, I'm simply saying that Tony is right about the situation and Carmela knows it. Not entirely right, however. Carmela's main issue is about how she feels regarding Tony. She no longer feels like Tony cares for her as his wife and partner. Because Tony isn't understanding Carmela's true motivations for divorce, Carmela tells him that she's been in love with Furio for the last year. Tony thinks about hitting her but smashes in multiple holes instead. Tony again taunts Carmela, saying how she must have been living such a hard life because all Furio did was talk to her. Carmela says Furio made her feel like she mattered. Tony replies to her saying that the reason he slept with Svetlana was because she could actually converse with him. Carmela yells that she is a person with something to say. The following scene is best seen rather than told.
I could converse with her because she had something to say.
I am here! I have things to say!
Besides, bring the fucking chairs down and did you sign the living trust? She's a grown fucking woman who's been kicked around and she's been on her own and she's had to fight and struggle.
Unlike me, is that it? Who the fuck wanted it like this? Who the fuck pissed and moaned at just the idea of me with the fucking real estate license?
Free to sit back for 20 fucking years and fiddle with the air conditioning and fucking bitch and complain and fucking bitch to me, to your priest. Fuck it.
Tony's long-term feelings about Carmela come out as he views her as an annoyance, like a mother almost. He even mentions how she is dull and outsources her entertainment through other people that he then has to deal with, such as Father Intantola. Carmela replies to all of that, saying that there's no way Tony really wanted Tracy and Hepburn.
Who knew all this time you wanted Tracy and Hepburn?
Tracy and Hepburn are viewed as the ideal, perfect Hollywood relationship. Carmela is prodding at the fact that if he really wanted a perfect relationship like that, where she wouldn't bitch and complain, he wouldn't be sleeping around. She furthers this point by asking if the other women he slept with, like Irina, have something to say too, calling him out on this hypocrisy, but also adding to the fact that she doesn't understand Tony as good as she thinks. Tony was still attracted to Svetlana regardless if she has something to say. Carmela just bores him, to which he is hung up on. Carmela calls Tony a hypocrite. David Chase wrote this episode, and you can tell he loves irony. We can see this best in season 3 episode 1 with the water heater. Carmela walks out after calling Tony a hypocrite. Tony looks like he's gonna say something, but stops. The most important note to draw from the scene is that no one is correct. There was not a winner or a loser. They are both bad people who misplace their own motivations and project their insecurities and failures as a result. We cut to the Junior Soprano trial, and Bobby and Janice are there to support Junior. Tony calls Melfi, but soon hangs up and blocks the number. Tony feels insecure and embarrassed for Melfi after quitting therapy. Junior gets a mistrial. GG. Tony and AJ talk about Carmela while Benny and little Polly move his speakers out of the room. Tony tells AJ to be nicer to his mother and to go buy her something nice. At his home, Junior tells Bobby and Janice to order some pizza for the mistrial. Bobby orders the pizza and they literally remember him as a regular customer. That shit is way too funny, bro.
I want to get one large cheese and tomato and then one without each. Yeah, that's me.
Junior sees two people being intimate and immediately wants them to cut that shit out. We cut to Benny and little Polly on Tony's boat, pointing the speakers at Al's house. At his family dinner, Al starts to hear a Dean Martin concert. He sees the name of the boat as Stugatz and says this.
Fucking Goomba trash. This whole shoreline's turning into the Gulf of Sorrento.
This guy is likely Jewish with the name Sapinsley, and the writer's making him a lawyer. The idea of this Jewish guy being really racist against Italians is really funny to me. This is why many people consider him a law-abiding Tony. Their wives even have similar type of builds. Tony goes to meet up with Johnny at night and tells him that the hit is off. Tony explains his reasoning for doing such a thing as maintaining peace and order. John gets upset, explaining his rage for ever going back to work under Carmine and his idiot son. Tony says John can still carry out his plan and that he will never utter a word of the their conversations. John is obviously upset and yells that he couldn't ever trust a person who leaves him holding his cock out like this. They leave things on a sour note, but ultimately John and Tony are still friends. I love almost every Tony and Johnny conversation, and I think it's honestly embarrassing writing how we never got a clash or an arc or resolution to their dynamic or friendship. The final scenes of the episode tie together the overall point, message, or theme. Tony tells the family that he'll be living somewhere else, fully cementing their separation. The kids take it hard and they start crying for Tony and embracing him. The final scene of the episode is Al and his wife looking at the Stugats and his wife begging for him to give Tony his money. Both of these scenes highlight the same thing: Tony breaking apart two families. With Al, it's on a smaller scale, but nonetheless, he is actively putting stress on his wife. This is the overall point of Whitecaps. This is in complete contrast to the 6 episodes earlier with Everybody Hurts. In that episode, Tony was trying to help and appeal to everyone he could, but in this episode, he only hurts everyone. He tears open his relationship with Carmela, he hurts Al's relationship with his wife, and he also creates permanent tension on his relationship with Johnny Sack. The word Whitecaps means a wave crest breaking into a white foam. This name is used to symbolically judge this episode as Tony's actions breaking different relationships into smaller pieces. Incredible writing here. From the cinematography, acting, and plot development, this episode is nothing short of literal genius. It's hard to describe exactly what this episode does so well. It's almost like all of it was planned since episode 1. There are so many callbacks and references. I love how their conversation has all these layers and nuances to figure out, only for it to be left worse than ever. This is the longest Sopranos episode to date, coming in at 72 minutes, and it becomes pretty obvious to me why this is the case.
Hey, Dr. Freed, you know about that Viagra shit?
He won't quit, this fucking guy.